All right, Soul Lounge Prime Time, DJ LeRoy. How are you?
Night Watchman. It's been a while, and what's happening with this the baked apple? I mean, it's been hot, man.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
but certainly not as hot as the topic that we're going to be tackling this evening, and that, of course, is America's true art form, jazz.
Jazz. Jazz, baby.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So we got a wonderful group of panelists, and I guess hey, let's get to it. I think first of all, her organization embraces the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the expression of their values, their programming, and their cultural and organizational practices. That, of course, is someone who I truly could consider a friend and also my lunch partner when we meet Jesus and Merrill, the executive director of the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, Ms. Tracy Hyter-Suffern. Bring her out.
Good morning.
Hi, Tracy. How you doing, my dear?
I'm doing well. That's probably the best introduction I've ever gotten. Thank you very much. The most
So,
apt.
see, so I guess Night Watchman, he's not pulling one's leg when he says that. Yes, I am the introduction man of Harlem.
That's right. He's
So,
right.
so then I guess to continue this, we're going to actually bring out two, not one, but two folks from Harlem Late Night Jazz. That, of course, now I not only is she a host, but she is an actress, a writer, a theatrical person. I mean, she is doing it all. And that, of course, is the director and co-founder of Harlem Late Night Jazz, Miss C. Kelly Wright. C. Kelly,
Hey, good morning, guys. How are you?
good, good, good. How you doing?
I'm excellent. Thank you.
Excellent, beautiful. And then of course, I'm trying to wonder, like, who sent this brother to me? I think it might be my former board chair. It might have been the Honorable Keith Wright. And we got it popping right away. There was a connection. That how a watchman when you meet someone and there is instant kismet. This, I think, is what happened when we actually have another director and co-founder of Harlem Late Night Jazz, and that, of course, is the incomparable Dakota Pippins. Bring him out.
Good morning. Incomparable. That sounds like Michael Jordan.
You know it. You know it. That's right. As a matter of fact, we're going to have a 10-part series on your life, Dakota. You know that already. So get ready.
Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here this morning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you know what, ladies and gentlemen, let's get it started here. We talk about America's true art form being jazz. I want you guys to tell me your journey to get here. Let's start out. Tracy, do tell.
Journey to get to Harlem, to jazz, to the museum. There are a whole bunch of different journeys in there. But why don't I talk about Harlem?
Oh, okay. Yes,
Do
do
that.
tell.
And you've heard parts of this story, Curtis. I grew up in a house where my mother had an encyclopedic knowledge of music, right? And so there was always music playing in the house, and it was always all kinds of music. And even though I'm from Staten Island, I grew up in a neighborhood that was the most diverse neighborhood on the island at the time. And in fact, a lot of musicians who you will know are from my neighborhood. Reggie Washington, the bass player.
Mhm.
Kenny Washington, the drummer. Reggie was the best man at my wedding, as a matter of fact.
Mm.
Their sister, Yvette Washington. I said a lot of famous people, but those are the three I can think of, except for Wu-Tang. Wu-Tang is from
Yes, they are.
So, in fact, they grew up in the place where I grew up because I'm older. But what that meant was not only was there a diversity of people, there was a diversity of music, and the foundation of that music was always jazz, even though nobody called it jazz. It was just music. It was the music that you listened to in your house. It was the music that you danced to. And one of my favorite stories to tell about my childhood is when I was 12 years old and my father decided I was responsible enough to have an allowance.
Mm-hmm.
I took my $2 and I dragged my mother to the record store and I bought my very first album was Mongo Santa Maria.
Oh wow, yes,
And
yes.
so because that's what I'd been hearing in my house, and that's what I'd watched my mother and my uncles and aunts dance to all the time. And so that's where the journey to Harlem began. I remember as a child just dreaming, wanting to live in Harlem. And back there, though it was, as it is now, the cultural epicenter, Harlem wasn't necessarily, it was Harlem of the 70s, right? So there was a lot going on in terms of the Black Power movement. Angela Davis was my hero. I kept a poster of her on my bedroom for years. I got kicked out of math class because I wanted to wear an afro just like her. And I did. And the math teacher didn't like it. It was Staten Island.
Yeah.
But in the 80s, I ended up living on Riverside Drive in the same neighborhood with David Dinkins and a whole bunch of Roy Innes right across the street, a whole bunch of other people. And so I had the pleasure and the joy of living in Harlem for 12 years. Left Harlem, and then 4 years ago came back as the director of the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. And that's the short story of the journey.
Nice, very nice. So, C. Kelly, please do tell me your journey, as well as also being a dancer, no less, too. Do tell.
Yeah, that's what brought me to Harlem. Quite honestly, on a break from school, I won't give you too many details because that would tell my, but on a break from school, I wound up at a summer conference with the Dance Theater of Harlem. And I was living in Manhattan. I'm a Brooklyn girl.
Oh, BK.
Yes, Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, which is no longer here. But I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and then we moved to Michigan, and I find myself back in New York at Dance Theater of Harlem, and everything about Harlem was like a love song for me. Namely the size of the apartments.
Nice. You got a good deal, huh? Okay.
Well, all my dancer friends, I was living in Midtown at the time. So you can imagine.
Yes.
A closet.
And that
I was paying dearly for. 2021 prices in Midtown in the 80s, let's say.
Gotcha.
And then I go away, California, 18 years, come back to New York. I drop down and meet my brother at St. Nick's Pub.
Yep. Oh, yes.
And I'm like, I've been here. This is where it's just down the block from Dance Theater of Harlem.
That's right.
And I'm like, I'm back. And maybe this time I can get my big, beautiful Harlem apartment that I dreamed about. Well, I did wind up with one, but I also wound up with the pub as my landscape. And that was jazz, blues, soul, world beat. It was everything in one little aesthetically place. But the music was unmistakable and unquestionable. And then they closed, and then Lennox Lounge closed, and Casac's Death closed, and Nabe's closed, and all these places were closing, and we were like, what in the world are we gonna do other than just like complain to each other? So we did party. We did. And that one thing led to another. And now 5 years later, we're a nonprofit with, a congressional proclamation and like, thank you. And the community support and musician support and thousands of musicians like working and it's so fulfilling. It's so fulfilling, and it is in my heart. It's how my heart beats, and it's the soundtrack of my life. So I'm in for the long haul. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. And Dakota, I think one of the things I got to say that Harlem Late Night Jazz certainly has props, because for you guys to get let's say a sign off from Lloyd Williams and be a part of Harlem Week, you got to be legit. You got to be legit. So having said that, Dakota, do tell us your journey.
Well, maybe the best way to start it is to kind of go backwards. A story I like to tell is that when I first came to New York, right out of graduate school, 1972, I only had one friend, I only had one telephone number, one person I knew, and that was Miles Davis. That's because I'm from East St. Louis, Illinois, and my grandmother played the piano, and she wrote music and poetry, and my uncle and Miles were really good friends and played the trumpet, and my mother, my uncles, my aunt, they all seemed to have what I didn't have, which was kind of natural talent. So when you grow up around that, there's a love for music, and you almost, in a sense, take it for granted. You think the world is like that. I grew up where my favorite music at that time was Temptations, Impressions. Curtis Mayfield was my man. But in the house, there's, of course, Dizzy and Charlie and all of that. And so I was very fortunate to grow up in a household and in an area. I talk about that area in another project, the Jazz History Tree, that we might comment on later. So I guess I was just blessed to be born around it. And even though, my background is not music, it's primarily business, I just appreciate the opportunity to get back involved and to try to help preserve this. I think someone mentioned it's America's only original art. And I think Amiri Baraka said it best. He said, the music, this is our history. I think our story and our mission as a people is wrapped up into this music.
Absolutely.
That's my story.
A quick question, NightWatchman. Were you able to capture all of that? Because I dropped out.
You're on mute, Bob, I think.
Yes, we got everything. No one knew you dropped out until you told them. So.
Okay. Then you know what?
That's how good I am. Okay.
Yes, you are. So just for that, NightWatchman, I will let you ask the next question. Go ahead.
No, you're back, man. You're back.
I'm back.
Earn your keep.
Okay, well, needless to say, we talked about in Dakota, America's true original art form, jazz. And we certainly see that there's been there's been a shakeup in the paradigm because of streaming services, because literally, we certainly do know, I grew up not in a household that really played jazz, but played popular music, specifically R&B coming out of the whole Motown experience, right? And so I do know that jazz musicians for many, many years, and I guess it may even continue, have had a rough go of it in terms of seeing that their art form is not only, consumed by the public, but also appreciated, really, really appreciated. So Tracy, with the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, what has been the thing that's been most challenging for you in terms of bringing in people to appreciate the art form?
The challenge has been actually sort of a fun challenge. One of the things I'd like to say about the museum a lot is that we show up in unexpected places, and we work really hard to do that. And by that, I don't just mean physical places. I mean really looking for those intersections where jazz shows up. And one of the questions I ask people all the time when they find out where I work is, because a lot of people will say, I don't know jazz, I don't know anything about jazz. My response usually is, you like jazz, you just don't know it. You listen to jazz all the time and you just don't know it. It is the foundation of almost everything that you listen to. If you're listening to pop, if you're listening to Latin music, if you're listening to so many other kinds of music, if you're listening to so much of hip hop, you like jazz. Anytime you're going like this, you just haven't named it a lot of times. And there are so many, for example, hip hop artists who have their foundation in jazz. And now Robert Glasper and Kendrick Lamar are doing their parts to bring jazz to the people, right? And so I think that part of the problem with jazz is a marketing issue. I think one of the big issues is that as soon as people hear a lot, not everybody, but as soon as a lot of people hear jazz, they think you need to have a master's degree to understand what you're listening to, right? They don't understand that jazz is the people's music. Jazz was dance music. It still is dance music. Jazz is the kind of music you do nod your head to. And just like any other genre of music, there are different kinds of jazz. And one of my favorite quotes is a Duke quote, and that is, there are only two kinds of music. There's good music and there's bad music. Right? So if you're tapping your feet to it, you may not know that it's jazz, but that's probably, if not something that many people would define as jazz, it has its foundations in that art form.
Excellent. C. Kelly, tell us.
Give me the question again, because that was so comprehensive.
Absolutely.
And I just nodded so often.
I hear you. So in terms of knowing the challenges that musicians have in terms of getting folks to really, really embrace their art form, let's say jazz, what are some of the challenges that you've met with Harlem Late Night Jazz in terms of getting folks to really, really appreciate the music? And as Tracy had mentioned, folks don't even know. They may be appreciative of jazz without really even knowing it. So what has been your experience?
Well, that the exact same thing. It's that people don't know they like it. They don't know. There's a huge umbrella that that I like to think of as jazz, but they just think of one style of music, and so opening them up to that, and we've been able to do that through Harlem Late Night Jazz by just not allowing ourselves to be defined by one style of jazz. We bring all types of music, and it's Harlem Late Night Jazz, and you'll understand it better by and by. But I think one thing that we've done, and I'll let Dakota talk more about that, is the jazz history tree, because I feel like as we can get people to understand what this whole concept is and the comprehensive picture of the art form of jazz, then they will relax about it. And also when we do performances, we're very careful to give a wide cross section of music and musicians and artistry, so that they can grow an appreciation for that, because I like to say and believe that knowledge breeds appreciation. So the more you know about it, the more you will learn to appreciate it, talk about it, become a beacon for it, and a missionary for it. And so that is our aim and our goal as we are out there all the time trying to look like, oh, it's just music, it's whatever. Very important. Yes, very, very important.
Well, as I mentioned, I grew up on Motown, Stax, the whole thing in terms of R&B, which of course we know, if you know music, it has its history and roots in jazz, which has its a history in of course, church music, gospel, and that's the whole foundational experience. Now, certainly,
but with DJ LeRoy, you leave out a part, because, as you know, we also grew up with the jazz fusion of the 70s, because in our foundational music was Herbie Hancock and Noel Pointer and Weather Report and Jean-Luc Ponty, and there were so many of those artists that were literally, part of our formative years. And not to mention, you think about acts like Earth, Wind, and Fire that were very jazz rooted. Maurice White was a jazz drummer before he came up with the concept for Earth, Wind, and Fire. In fact, I had an interesting story. There's a jazz bassist by the name of Paul West, and he told me, I called him up the day that Maurice White passed, and I was just like, well, hey, I'm checking in on all my musician friends, I just want to kind of touch you and see you're still okay. So he told me a story about coming down from the Newport Jazz Festival. He gave Maurice White a ride back from Newport to New York. And Maurice White says, hey, I got this new concept I want to do. And would you be interested in playing bass in this new band I'm starting called Earth, Wind, and Fire? And Paul was a very traditional bassist. So he's like, I don't want to play that electric bass thing. That's not my thing. But it just interesting to hear that story and understand that Maurice White and a lot of artists just kind of took the openness of the 70s, but it was rooted in the jazz foundations, and then they took the music in a whole different place. And that was our foundational music as much as the funk and the stand-up groups that we listened to. We listened to those groups as much. My first concert I went to was a Herbie Hancock concert.
Okay.
And after that, I went to the Parliament Funkadelic.
Well, see, in NightWatchman, I'm definitely going to go to Dakota, but I want to first say that in terms of my experience, listening, switching from AM radio to FM, okay, WBLS, the sound of soul, right?
Right.
But I first listened to some WBGO.
Well, what about WRVR? Remember?
Oh,
WRVR. That's right. We're all dating ourselves right now.
Yeah. When I went off the radio, I sat in my car in silence for about 15 minutes.
Yeah, we all that was like a friend died when WRVR, and it was so unceremonious. They just took it off the air one morning.
Western station. I was driving to work. I thought something was wrong with my radio.
Yeah. You said, "What the heck is going on?" So now, some of the jazz purists and traditionalists had a problem at one point with, let's say, CD 101.9. I miss it myself. I'm going to say that I miss them. But now, Dakota, what was your take on smooth jazz? Is that jazz or not?
Well, I think Tracy and Kelly and Bob, and you spoke on it, I think really got it right. There is a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about what jazz is. And I in developing the jazz history tree, I took the bold step of defining the music, okay? And at least from my perspective. And I should give some credit to Randy Weston because a lot of it from
big
him.
Up. Yes.
But jazz is simply the African American soul, and by that I mean spirit, psyche, worldview, expressed musically. And every generation has contributed to it. There's an infinite number of genres. On the jazz history tree, I write about 33 of them. Going back to the African American roots are work songs, Negro spirituals, and blues. And the first one to emerge after emancipation was boogie woogie. And then you come up to ragtime and Dixieland. You got branches, you got soul, you got hip hop breaking out in the 80s. Afro beat in the 70s, Afro beats in 2010, and the tree is still growing. And there's been a consistency of message, but I don't want to kind of spend too much time on that. I think, and all you spoke to that, and I think there's confusion about what the music is. I just want to add a couple more things. Broad scale, the music industry is broken. Music is free right now. Everything is going digital. You almost have to want the musician to have the money to actually buy something. I've done that just because I had the music already. So, and the music industry hasn't really figured that piece out. And another factor, you mentioned the radio, you mentioned RVR. Used to be in most black cities in the country, at least the ones pretty much all of them, there are 1 or 2 black stations. That was it. And all the generations listened to it. So even though, you know, I'm trying to find the Temptations and the Four Tops or whatever, I'm also listening to, you know, Sarah Vaughan, whatever was on that station. And that was the same thing in New York. You know, you had BLS, you had soul stations, you had Kiss, then hip hop hit. And for the very first time, you had hip hop only radio stations. And if I had have been 16, I would have gone there too. And that created, you know, I think the second schism. Bebop was the first, but the second schism, I think, because the generations didn't realize they were connected. Let me put it that way. And then just one more thing, working in clubs here in Harlem, and over 5 years and trying to figure this thing out. It's the overhead, you know, and you know, there are some solutions we've been thinking about that can help solve that problem. Oftentimes, the cost of the music is a difference between that club making any money that night. And then you throw in all the stuff that Tracy and you guys mentioned about marketing and all that stuff on top of it. So, but I say all that, and I'm very, very, very optimistic because, you know, I think in this kind of situations, we're beginning to take control of this art form, which is ours. And maybe that's enough.
and I mean, certainly now we say it is a true African-American art form, no doubt about it.
No doubt
Whites can absolutely play and participate in the genre, but it is the heartbeat that you feel is ours. It's truly African-American, and the struggles that we have actually traversed all these many, many years, no doubt. I think one of my first immersions in it might have been listening to, let's say, Al Jarreau, Look to the Rainbow album, Michael Frank's, once again, kind of a CD 101 smooth jazz. But that gave me a first little basis. But then I started to listen to the straight ahead stuff. I started to listen to Miles. I started to listen to, of course, Mingus. I started to listen to, you know, all those guys who were literally geniuses. And that really, really, I guess, set me on a course to explore it more and more. So when I also saw, as you said, with hip hop and whatnot, saw Robert Glasper live, but having a DJ on stage with him, and it was wonderful, you know. And as you say, this particular form, you got 33 branches already, Dakota. So you say it's still evolving.
It's growing. You know, there's some kid right now somewhere doing something, and that's gonna make hip hop seem like it's you know, swing.
So now over at the Jazz Museum, Tracy, are there any forms that you don't embrace in terms of music?
That's a really good question. And it's funny, my mind immediately went to, I'm going to expose my prejudices right now. So, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to offend anybody. But, no, I would say no. But I would say no because, in part, what I said before, there's two kinds of music, good and bad. Also, though, I don't think that opportunity has presented itself to say, no, that's not what we do here. So that hasn't really come up. We have had the problem that we have been conquering, and oddly enough, the pandemic has helped us with this, is inviting people into the museum, and specifically Harlem. So the museum has, pandemic aside, become a place where Harlem feels at home, where before that wasn't necessarily the case because of what I said before, and that is the intellectualization of the music. I amen what Dakota was saying. This is, for me, this is a spiritual experience because of everything we've all said. This is foundational, not just to the music, but to my own upbringing, to my own history. And so there are certain things about it that I hold sacred. And one of those things is this, something I said before, and that is, this is the people's music. And when I talk about the pandemic, one of the silver linings of the pandemic, in my opinion, is that it has pushed the music back out into the streets. It's pushed the music back into the hands of the artists. And while a lot of artists were not getting paid for that, what it did was it permitted them expression of their own art without the confines of somebody telling them this is what it needs to sound like, this is what sells, this is what won't sell. And the commitment of the museum, of the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, has been, during the pandemic, we keep jazz artists working. And that definition of jazz artists, it has expanded to fashion designers, fine artists, photographers, spoken word artists. If your foundations are in jazz, and we just ended our gala at the beginning of June, and the title of the gala was The Roots and Roots of Jazz. And as Dakota alluded to that, and Bob alluded to, that journey began in Africa. And thank you, Randy Weston. That journey began in Africa. It traveled the Caribbean, it landed in New Orleans, and all the way up through to the Bronx, right? That is the roots, R-O-O-T-S, and the roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, of jazz. And that's what we talk about. And those are just the geographic roots. There are those very personal roots as well, that we, I hope, as an institution, are providing expression for without the same kinds of limits that are imposed by other places, and in particular, the music industry.
Gotcha. Harlem Late Night, are there any things I will not hear in terms of music genre?
Yeah, I mean, Kelly, if you don't, Tracy just mentioned, the African American roots are work songs, Negro spirituals and blues, but they come from African traditions of ring, shout, and call and response. And this concept of if you go to the dictionary and you look up jazz, they'll define it as a rhythm African American a form of music in which the players invent the music as they play. They call it improvisation.
Right.
They call it improvisation. That's a word, but they don't begin to explain where this improvisation is coming from. And in the church, we call it let go, let God. The idea is simply that the musician lets go to the power that's greater than him, and that magnifies the impact of the performance. I mean, that's the idea. And he becomes an individual manifestation of God's excellence in that moment. And that is a thing that I think that defines the music. And the fact that it is rooted in this African Americanness. Country music, for example, emanated from the blues. I spent, when I was working on the tree, I say, does country music belong here? And I decided no, because in my definition of the music, if it's not true to that spirit, then it's not there. It's like the difference between rock and roll, which is there on the tree. I mean, rock and roll, clearly they used to call it race music. But now you have a genre out there called rock that came out of rock and roll. I chose not to put that on my tree. Not that it's not a legitimate genre and that there are people out doing a great job. It's going back to how where it emanates from. And there's a spirit and there's a message in this music, fighting against oppression, for peace, for love, for speaking the truth about reality. It's been in this music from hip hop, all the way back to boogie woogie. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but I think you can probably guess the genres that I wouldn't put on the show.
yes, I could. Yes, I could. So I would hear then, let's say, Ray Charles, what he did his country western album.
Oh, absolutely right. Absolutely right. You know something? I'll tell you a quick story. Ray Charles changed my life. Ray Charles probably, is responsible for half the trouble I got into. Because, by the time I was, kind of growing up, my grandmama, who used to be, played music and used to be a dancer, had become church going. She was in church, and only thing she listened to at that time was gospel music, and Mahalia Jackson was certain. She didn't allow a lot of that stuff played in the house. So I went down to a friend of mine's place, and his old man had Ray Charles. What did I say? And I got a woman way over time. And the world was never the same. The world was never the same for me. So that's my Ray Charles story.
Good one. Good one. Oh, Lord. So, well, I want to know, in terms of what's happening in the music business with the streaming and with other services that have come online. What have you heard from the musicians themselves? How are they getting paid here? Are they getting paid? Anyone?
Well, it's complicated because a lot
You're not a musician. What are you talking about?
I know a lot about music. I know a lot about music royalties. I have a business partner who consults with artists on royalties, and this is a problem that all artists have, is actually getting paid. Because the music industry as a business is complex by design, and part of that design is to keep money out of the hands of artists. And if artists don't learn the legal part of it, it's very hard for them to get compensated. And the problem with a lot of these new forms of getting paid is that now the money is now going through a different track, and if you don't understand that, you don't necessarily get paid. So I think that jazz artists are facing some of the same challenges they were, just more complex, because before it was just, can we collect from our label, and when can we collect now is the little money that they get from Spotify, which is a pittance in some of these streaming services such as YouTube. Are they even signed up properly to get that? So I think that legacy artists right now have a challenge in terms of understanding enough about what's going on. New artists have some of the same problems, but at least a lot of the new artists, I think, are maybe more aware because of the abuses of older artists. So it's not good, but the silver lining is that in the digital era, there's more tracking. In the old music industry, it was very, very easy to kind of obscure where the payments were going and those sorts of things. And the industry is fraught with so-called attorneys who do not look out for artists. So I think that organizations such as yours, part of it has got to be kind of that looking out for artists and making sure that they get their just due.
Gotcha. C. Kelly, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I do. Because one thing that I noticed, I live on both sides of the line, right? As an artist, and then as a resource to artists. I noticed that the fees haven't changed very much over the years, and now we're coming back post pandemic, and I see the same thing. It's so and we have to look at these from how our organization works, but the clubs and what they have also been through this pandemic, and now they're struggling to stay afloat and keep their doors open. And now, we want to bring music back, but we can't really afford to bring music. As Dakota said earlier, the overhead is really putting a death knell in a coffin of this music and this art form, and they don't have money to pay the musicians. But certainly if they have good music in there, they can generate more money, but that never seems to trickle down to the artist. And so they have to deal with the same fees. The fact that artists have been discovered as non-essential and yet quietly extremely essential. It's like, okay, so we've recognized the importance of some other jobs and service oriented occupations, but not even the artist. But yet they're putting us in bubbles and they've been filming like crazy on the back end and not being careful. So and not paying more, not understanding that these artists that they're requesting are coming out of the woodworks, but at a hazard, right? Because we perform for and are very physical with people. And the restaurants and the venues are not doing a great job at securing them. So it's kind of, it's kind of dangerous territory still out there. And feeling like I hear a lot of conversation about, well, I mean, they haven't had to work for a year. They should be happy to just be working. I hear that.
Wow. I hate that. A lot. And the other thing we got to talk about is kind of the automation of music. And that's one thing that jazz fights against, because jazz encourages having a live drummer, having, live horn sections and the interplay between live artists. Because there's been this push that just have, okay, like you might go into a restaurant and see music, but if the singer is live, but they're playing a track, or even they might have a keyboard player, but the drummer is a drum track. And these are situations where, the artist, the live artist gets eliminated by automation per se. And jazz, thankfully, is an art form that encourages, more participation, more live music, and that magic that happens when you have artists at a level of mastery that are playing in sync. I think we've all had some transcendent experiences sometimes when you see a jazz group that just is in sync, and it's like, how did they do that? It's just amazing.
Yeah, totally. You know what? I want to also kind of figure out, but between your organizations, is there collaboration?
Well, can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dakota.
I think there should be. I think probably the only reason that there hasn't been a lot is time and schedules and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But I see a similar mission, and I see opportunities, because even though we're kind of on the same path, we're pulling in different gaps. So I think that's something that we need to make happen.
Okay.
And I really hope so, because I always, whenever I see Tracy, she's there, she's present, right? She's sincere. She's not overly anything. She makes me want to get to know her and the organization better. She's there as an opportunity, but she's not making anyone do anything. But she always stands as an opportunity. So I really love that. I wanted to say that to you, Tracy.
Thank you so much. And let me say this. Dakota was the first time I met Dakota, and then the second time was with Kelly. And he was one of the first people in Harlem who came to me and said, "This is who I am. This is who you are. We need to do something together." That was nice. Probably three. I've been with the museum for 3.5 years. So that was probably 3.5 years ago. And as he said, and let me just say that he's come after me often. And the reason we haven't done anything is exactly what he said. It's about time. It's about resources. But it really is about let's figure it out. Let's sit down and figure it out and do something. Because here's the truth. We can do what we do anywhere. And one of the things the pandemic has, again, forced us to do is come out of the museum, because the museum is a small place. And so we're figuring out, how do we go outside and keep our audience and bring people to the music and bring the music to people. So I'll come to you, as Kelly has said, with an opportunity. Listen, we've got a performance coming up. Can we do it in your spot? Or can we do it together? And so back to the issue of artists getting paid, thankfully, because of the generosity of our funders, we can pay artists. It doesn't mean we have a whole lot of money. It means that the money that we have is to pay artists. Those artists can perform anywhere, right? It doesn't have to be inside of the museum for it to be a museum project. And the museum collaborates at every single opportunity. That's who we've become.
I think that's a natural collaboration, and I think we should talk because obviously we focused on venues. We've been in 10 of them, I think, in Harlem, and now we're outdoors because of this. But
yes,
also what the museum is about is a great thing, and so there's some possibilities there. So, I'm excited about as we move forward.
Me too.
And I guess that would be one of the things. So coming out of the pandemic, we couldn't gather. So now National Jazz Museum, Harlem Late Night Jazz is going to come out and attract crowds to outdoor venues. Okay.
Carlos, can I make a quick comment about the pay thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think what Kelly and Tracy and Bob said was right on. Musicians haven't had a raise since the 70s, I think. They're playing thing for a band in the clubs now. But the bigger issue, I think, is that music is free. My background is marketing, so I come from that. And I think, and sustainability. And as you see corporations like Amazon, for example, who was making a lot of money in the pandemic, now they're talking about they're a great corporate citizen and all the things they do to help the planet. When I went to see Kamasi Washington in Central Park a couple of years ago, I had the music. He had a 3 CD set. He turned that thing out. I stood in line to pay $35 for, I don't know what it would cost, to buy his 3 CD set because I wanted him to have the money. Moving away, the hip hoppers led the way in terms of selling their own CDs. They make more money if they sell them themselves and what they're getting with the residuals and those sorts of things. Now, to me, coming from a marketing background, the only way an artist, I think, is going to make a lot of money. The days of the gold record and hitting that and over. Yeah. It is the consumer has to want that artist to have money. If you're Beyonce, first of all, you're only making money for live performances now. And if you're Beyonce, that can work for you.
Right.
But a typical audience won't. So artists need to begin to think about that and think about what they stand for that's greater than just their art and what they do. Is it a cause? Is it a mission? Is it the way they carry themselves or what they project? Those are the kind, it's going to be necessary, just like it is for corporations, for artists to move along in the future. And those that do it right, they're going to just, and I think it's something good about it, because I think the fact, as always, was a social, spiritual political message, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Music. So that's my 2 cents.
Now that was a whole quarter. We got you.
Maybe a nickel. Maybe a nickel. When I was a kid, you could get a Baby Ruth with a nickel.
Absolutely. Okay. So now, as a consumer, don't get me wrong. I love Spotify. Okay. I love my Amazon Music. Now, Amazon Music, of course, you have to pay for. Okay, Spotify, not so much unless you want to be able to take it anywhere that you travel where you have internet access. So, is streaming a disservice to the artist? I do remember because, as you say, Dakota, I'm certainly a numbers guy. I know about that. Hey, that if you sell a particular product, right, there is a particular then cost that the end user will get, but also the maker of said product gets a percentage of that end product. So now in streaming, is it because it's so low? Is that it?
Yes. The payout is extremely low to the artist, more than any other music delivery system that we've had to date, and the shift from physical product to streaming has resulted in a decline it resulted in overall decline in revenue to the industry, but the portion that artists actually receive is just so minuscule. Even people who have, you know, people can have 500 million streams and barely make, $1,000. It's,
Wow.
it's really, it's unconscionable. And
Mm-hmm.
I've seen, I was watching a YouTube video with Yassine Bey, formerly known as Most Def,
Mm-hmm.
and he was talking about streaming, and he just says, as an artist, he is offended that somebody else can decide how much he should get paid. He's like the labor that actually makes the music, gets the least amount of pay out of this whole thing, because the labels are making money and Spotify is making money, and you have all these other other entities in the stream, and the artist is getting this small piece of chicken. We'll call it like that.
This is this paradigm is so old. I remember having an argument about this very thing back in the 80s.
Wow.
What has changed is the platform. So now you have streaming, where before it was analog and you bought a CD or a cassette or a record.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But the paradigm, the model has not changed. And one of my brothers always says, his answer to everything is, we need a revolution. But
the revolution is, we have a revolution here, but it also has got to be a revolution in the mind, because
that's my
an artist can actually now go directly to the consumer, which was very difficult before. There's an essay online called 1,000 True Fans, and it just talks about the fact, and it's not just music artists, but in general, anyone online, if you can develop and cultivate and have a direct relationship with 1,000 true fans, you can be sustainable, and that's really what most artists are not looking to necessarily be platinum and millionaires and billionaires, but they want to be sustainable with their art. And if you think about it, if you had 1,000 true fans that are willing to pay you $10 a month, that's $120,000 a year. It's a livable wage. It's a living. It allows an artist enough to create. So I think, with artists today, some of the key is to wean themselves from the label system, because that system doesn't necessarily favor the artists anymore, and in particular in niches where you have smaller groups of fans, but they're consistent, they're loyal. And I think jazz is definitely one of those art forms where people who love it are very loyal to the fans, and they want to support their artists. And so I think that a direct model online, it just makes a lot more sense than trying to do this label thing. And I don't want to say there are labels that absolutely do support the artists and support the art form. I don't want to broad brush it, but most music today run through these massive super labels that now are not even trying. Now, if you're an artist that used to sell 100,000 copies, you're not moving enough for them to invest in. They're looking for the Taylor Swifts and the Nicki Minaj's, and so it's for artists to fend for themselves these days, and artists have to become more business people in order to be more sustainable.
That's right.
Gotcha.
Can I say amen to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So here we're near the end of the show, so I'd love for all of you guys to leave us with some closing comments. C. Kelly.
Okay. Well, look, Harlem Late Night Jazz has just about exploded. So that's the main thing that I want people to be left with. There's so much music in the streets. We have Jackie Robinson Park music series every second and fourth Friday, Patrick's Place each and every Friday. That's 151st and 8th Avenue. We have NAMA. We're bringing music back to the National Association Musical, yes, Musical Association. There we go. Yes, and we're doing a Backyard Jerkin Jazz. It's a hybrid indoor-outdoor kind of event. On Sundays, we're at Harlem Shake with a Sunday Fun Day. It's very
beautiful,
friendly soul music. We have Uptown Night Market coming every second Thursday to the Fairway parking lot area. And that's going to be tremendous. And that is some of what we're doing this summer to bring the music to the people, keep it in the streets, safe and accessible.
And C. Kelly, do tell, where can one reach you?
Yes, HarlemLateNightJazz.org is our website. We have an Instagram page, Harlem Late Night Jazz, Facebook, Twitter. You can find us anywhere. C. Kelly Wright is my name. C. Kelly Wright, not wrong.
Info
Good one.
at HarlemLateNightJazz.org.
That started with HarlemLateNightJazz.org. There it is.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Okay, nice.
They can find us everywhere. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Tracy, do tell us.
Sure. I'll start with where you can find the information. JMIH.org, or just Google National Jazz Museum in Harlem. We have a Facebook page, National Jazz Museum in Harlem. We have Instagram. This summer, look for us in a few places. In August, we always celebrate the Afro-Latin roots of jazz. We'll be outside all over Harlem.
So back up for 1 second. Are you going to be dancing?
I will be dancing for the first time in a year and a half.
Whoa! Okay. Gotcha.
And then before August, we're starting our Jazz Through the Lens of James Baldwin series, where we'll be talking about the influence of the LGBTQ community on jazz and of jazz on the LGBTQ community. Nice. And we're doing so many other things. We'll be collaborating with the Charlie Parker Jazz Festival as we do every year. We'll watch for our pop-up concerts. We'll be out there, and we'll be looking for everybody, and we hope everybody is looking for us. And again, that's JMIH.org, and go to our events page.
Beautiful. Dakota, give some closing thoughts.
I just want to echo really everything everyone has said. I think the only thing I will add is that because of this change that we have with streaming and these new technology and the impact on the business, we're looking for new and innovative ways right now that might be premature here to make this work for us, and to develop sustainable ways to support this music, because Tracy and I and Kelly, we're in the same boat. You know, we raise by donations and apply for grants and that development. And while that's all good and dandy, it requires that you go out every year. You do that. I'm also on the board of the Jazz Foundation of America. We give like a couple of big events. They're huge events. Everybody's working, you know, to do it. And I think there may be ways to build a sustainable mechanism, self-generating, and that's a goal that we have to keep this music in Harlem. And part of it would involve this new technology and streaming. So, yeah, I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. Absolutely. NightWatchman, you want to take us home?
This has been a great panel. Thank you all for joining us. You've been listening to Soul Lounge Primetime on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Also can find us on our Soul Lounge Primetime YouTube channel. We are always on Monday nights, 7 p.m. on WHCR, and then we live stream at 8 o'clock on Monday nights. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you again soon.